Well, good morning. This is Barry Jones with sphistory.com, and we are continuing today. This is part four of the E. Howard Hunt series. And when we last discussed this topic on part three, we were going through the latter stages of 1962 and all of the events that led to a ramping up of a war, a silent war between the White House and the CIA. And excuse me, of course, E. Howard Hunt is part of the CIA. And so what I was trying to do is just show using context the adversarial position between the agency E. Howard Hunt worked for and the administration, JFK's administration. So that was through the end of 62. Today we're going to go through 63. And eventually, when we get to the end of this series, we'll be able to tie it all together and show you E. Howard Hunt's complicity in this whole plot to take down JFK's government. But context matters, and so we are continuing to build the case against simultaneously the agency and E. Howard Hunt, who is the man in the agency, not most responsible, but very much involved. So I entitled it E. Howard Hunt, part of All the President's Men, was a spin-off the Watergate movie. Of course, that's the first time the public really comes to know E. Howard Hunt. And so we're kind of working our ways backwards. That's a lot of the ways I learned about E. Howard Hunt is backwards. I first learned of him throughout the Watergate scandal. And then because of the White House tapes, where it was pretty evident, Richard Nixon was very concerned about anything that might come out if anybody dug deep into E. Howard Hunt's past. That caused me to be curious about E. Howard Hunt's past. And so you went back and you start to discover that he was very much involved in what happened in 1963. So we are in January 1963, and the we've come through this Cuban Missile Crisis in 62. And as a result of this Cuban Missile Crisis, JFK and Khrushchev were scared straight when it come to nuclear weapons. They realized just how close they came to pushing the buttons and bringing the world to the brink of the abyss. Actually, we were on the brink of the abyss, but and they are determined to resist the hardliners. Both of them have hardliners in their own governments that are trying to push us in that direction. But Khrushchev and JFK are determined to avoid that if they can. And one of the outcomes of the Cuban Missile Crisis was that JFK made several promises to Khrushchev, one of which was that we would never meddle in Cuba again. Our days of, remember after Bay of Pigs, he made this same promise, but he didn't keep it. He just changed Operation 40, the name of it, to Operation Mongoose, and doubled down. And that's why Khrushchev put the missiles in Cuba. Well, JFK has learned his lesson. He realizes that Khrushchev has good spies, and he knows if JFK is telling the truth or not. So this time he means it, and he aims to enforce that promise. Of course, CIA is not going to be happy about this. They have stations, they have the JM Wave Station down in Miami. They have uh, five Operation Mongoose bases set up. Uh, we went through this when we talked about the S Force in our earlier video. They had a base at No Name Key. They had a base in the Everglades. They had two bases off Lake Pontchartrain in New Orleans. They had a base in the Keys. And this is where they were doing all the training of these Cuban refugees. It was going to be their little pseudo army to invade Cuba again at some point. This is also where the S Force has been scattered, three at each base, and then periodically they'll be picked up and taken to Mexico at Clint Murchison's ranch to train for as a triangular fire team to assassinate Castro. So they got several things going on simultaneously to oppose the Cuban government generically, or generally speaking, and Fidel Castro specifically. And now they're being told by the White House, by JFK and his brother Bobby, to cease and desist. And that's not a popular order. You know, these CIA people have built this up and they've made promises to all these Cuban refugees. And these Cuban refugees are not these exiles. These are violent people. They've been involved in warfare uh, throughout their lives on the island of Cuba. Then they got forced off because they backed the wrong guy. And now they went back on and they're willing to do anything to get back. And as long as you are promising to be on their side and help them, they're on your side. But if you pull the rug out from under them, now they're going to be against you too. And uh, so the CIA, led by guys like Frank Sturgis and E. Howard Hunt, who are the CIA liaisons at two of these bases. Frank Sturgis was the liaison on No Name Key, which is the base they had on the Keys for the Operation Mongoose base. And he decides to defy the JFK order to close the base and instead launches a covert attack on a Russian ship. They actually sank this Russian ship. Now, think about the ramifications of this. We're just coming off the Cuban Missile Crisis. Kennedy has made these promises to Khrushchev. We're going to cease and desist all operations regarding Cuba. And in January 63, a rogue CIA agent, Frank Sturgis, launches a covert attack on a Russian ship and sinks it in Havana Harbor. And, if you're Khrushchev, you've already been lied to by Kennedy once before. And it would be easy for him to conclude that he's been lied to again. And so this could put us right back on the brink. And right on the heels of that, the same month, E. Howard Hunt, who is the CIA liaison at Everglades, does the same thing. He defies the JFK order to close his base, and like Sturgis, he launches a covert operation to land the S force in Cuba and assassinate Castro. So these two uh, these two operations that have been simultaneously at work in Operation Mongoose, one to overthrow the Cuban government, or at least provoke a war between us and the Cuban government. Uh, Sturgis launches an attack on a Russian ship to try to provoke that war. And in the second one, to assassinate Castro, Hunt launches a covert operation to try to assassinate Castro, all in the month of January of 1963. So this is very problematic. Um, if you're Khrushchev and you're trying to resist your hardliners, I can't imagine the pressure he was under. When he goes to them the first time and says, Kennedy has made a promise to leave Cuba alone, and then he realizes that Kennedy lied to him and changed Operation 40 to Operation Mongoose and continues unabated. I'm sure the hardliners chortled in his ear and said, see, we told you, you can't trust the American. And then after the Cuban Missile Crisis, when both sides, hardliners were trying to get their president, their Khrushchev to go to war, and both of them resist. And Khrushchev goes back to his hardliners and say, well, he's made another promise not to invade Cuba. He's also going to remove his missiles from Turkey and Italy, et cetera, et cetera. They can stand by and watch as the Americans dismantle the missile bases in Turkey and Italy. Okay, that's a promise that's easily verifiable. But this one promise regarding Cuba, right on the heels of that, you have these pinprick uh, covert ops led by Frank Sturgis and E. Howard Hunt. It makes it look like the American president has lied to their leader again. And so I'm sure they're putting all kinds of pressure on him. And of course, when Kennedy finds out about this, he's furious, makes him look like a liar. It puts us right back in the same situation again. So, president realizing, I don't know who I can trust. I'm ordering the CIA, and they are defying my orders. I'm ordering as the president of the United States, and they are defying my orders. So he sends 6 helicopter gunships, and he's got customs officials on and U.S. Marshals on these helicopter gunships. These are the folks that he can trust. And he's got 40 of them. And they're fully armed, and he sends them down to these bases to basically to burn out the bases, to seize the weaponry, the ammo, the C4, the explosives, the weapons, and to burn out both of these bases and to arrest the CIA liaisons that are in charge of these two bases, which are Frank Sturgis and E. Howard Hunt. And he charges them, Bobby Kennedy, Attorney General charges him with violation of the Neutrality Act. Now, this, he didn't hold him, probably should have. He didn't hold him. This was a shot across the bow to the CIA. Let him know, I know what you're doing, and I know who's doing it, and I'm going to take action to prevent it from happening. And if I have to arrest you and charge you with treason, I will. So this is his shot across the bow. So this is all a matter of public record. So this is the war that is amping up between the White House and the CIA. The CIA is just blatantly disobeying orders, and they're claiming ignorance, saying, "Oh, we didn't get the order, we didn't hear," et cetera, et cetera. Well, in March, that was in January. A couple months later, in March of '63, uh, JFK gives a speech, and he orders, is preparing to close, and announces this in this speech, 52 bases in 25 states. In addition, 21 overseas bases. So you're talking about 73 bases total. Now, this is at a time in the Cold War when the military industrial complex is saying we need to uh, escalate in our preparation for a war with the Soviets, not de-escalate. And if you followed any of my earlier videos, you see in their view a pattern that JFK, every time he is put in a position to have to stand up to the Soviets, he backs down. And this is perceived within that context as another example of him backing down rather than getting us more prepared for what's inevitable, a war with us and the Soviet, between us and the Soviets. He is trying to de-escalate and make us more vulnerable. This is with regard to conventional weapons and conventional war, which is going to be controversial enough. Remember now, we have the Trump card, and the Trump card is nuclear weapons. Now, the Soviets have nuclear weapons, but we're ahead of them. And the reason some of these military, the Joint Chiefs and a lot of the brass are pushing for a war with us, between us and the Soviets at this point in time in particular, is because we do have that advantage as far as nuclear weapons are concerned. And their thinking is uh, we won't have that advantage for very long. We should take advantage of it while we have it. And yes, there'll be some collateral damage here at home, but in the end, because of our overwhelming nuclear advantage, we'll destroy the Soviets. And this is the time to go at it. And so they've been pushing in that sort of with that thought in mind. And then about that time, in March of '63, he orders the closing of all these bases. Now, if you're these Joint Chiefs, the military brass, or the military industrial complex, you're not happy. This is a lot of money that's been flowing through this pipeline that you're counting on to continue to flow through this pipeline and is no longer going to be flowing through that pipeline. It's going to be cut off. And so you have that, and then you also have the fact that, we're losing forward. In these 21 overseas bases, we're going to be losing forward bases that we can use in the event of a war between us and the Soviets. The 52 bases in the 25 states, this is a political ploy by the Kennedys. A lot of these bases are redundant. A lot of these bases aren't necessary. And a lot of them are in states that didn't vote for him. So he's going to reallocate a lot of those resources to states that will vote for him in '64. And so for a number of reasons, the White House is obviously, this is a political ploy on their part too. No one's saying it's not. But if you're in the military or if you're in the CIA and you're in the national security apparatus or the deep state, you're looking at this as a threat to national security. But as long as he doesn't touch the nuclear hot button, or it doesn't touch our nuclear capability, you can kind of live with it. You're not happy about it, but you can kind of live with it. If he ever touches the nuclear capability, that's a red line that they aren't willing to cross. So we're going to see in '63 if he touches our nuclear capability. So anyway, this is not popular. A couple months later, in June of '63, he goes and gives a speech at American University in D.C. And in this speech, he says some things. Of course, the president's words carry a lot of weight. And he begins talking about peace. none of these, none of the national security apparatus is interested in peace. They're just not interested in it. They may say they are, but they're not. Um, the deep state, which I have defined repeatedly as the national security apparatus and all the corporations that feed it, they're not interested in peace. Peace isn't profitable. Uh, and so in the CIA, the intelligence, they're not interested in peace. They're the ones stoking up, trying to create a war with us, and at the minimum, Cuba. But it wasn't a Cuban ship that we sank off the shore of Havana. It was a Russian ship. So they're really trying to stoke a war between us and Russia. So you figure, you look at JFK in my mind is a lot like Julius Caesar. He's just surrounded by enemies wearing suits, enemies wearing military uniforms, enemies who, to his face, appear civil, appear to be maybe even his friends, but they're not friendly. And he's talking about peace. He says, what kind of peace am I talking about? Not a Pax Americana enforced on the world by American weapons of war. He even draws on that Roman peace that was enforced on the world by the weapons of the Roman military. He's drawn on that same, using that parallel to say we don't want to enforce a peace on the world that way. Uh, Regarding the Soviet Union and its allies, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures, and we are all mortal. So, two themes in this speech are alarming to the national security apparatus. A, that he's even talking about peace, and then B, that he's equating, from a moral equivalency standpoint, American people and Russian people, the Americans and the Russians. Not necessarily the American government, the Soviet government, but just from a humanity perspective, he's saying we're all the same. They're not better than us. They're not worse than us. We're not better than them. We're not worse. We're the same. We're the same. And that moral equivalency is not going to go over well within this national security apparatus. So that was in June, on June 10th. The next day, as if he can't, you know, the June 10th speech wasn't controversial enough. On the next day, he gives an address on civil rights. This is one of his, enduring legacies, is this address that he gave regarding civil rights. And by this time, in 61, he's had to handle several civil rights crises. And if you remember, when he ran for president in 59, he did not make civil rights the centerpiece of his campaign. He got forced into this. You think about it, he's a Democrat. And it's going to be hard enough for a Northeast liberal Democrat to get Southern Democrat votes. And that's where most of the Democrat Party's votes are in this country, down the South at that time. And so he had to really finesse this issue. But by 61, he's confronted as the sitting president, and one of his jobs is to protect American citizens and enforce the law. And the Freedom Rides, which were an attempt by civil rights workers from the North, get on buses and go south and register people to vote, et cetera, et cetera. They weren't doing anything wrong. They weren't breaking the law. In fact, they were trying to help African Americans get registered to vote, which was the law in 61. And their buses are being firebombed and being attacked. And the Southern governors are doing nothing to protect them. So he has to intercede. And of course, that offends a lot of these Southern Democrats, these governors in particular. We kind of expect that behavior out of a Republican president. Eisenhower did that in Arkansas. Remember with Orville Faubus and wouldn't let the Little Rock Nine into the school there in Little Rock. We expect that out of a Republican president, but we don't expect that out of a Democrat. He's one of ours. And it was viewed as, a stab in the back. Then in 62, when the state of Mississippi wouldn't let James Meredith enroll Ole Miss, he did it again. He sent down a National Guard to enforce the law. 54 was when the Supreme Court passed ruled in Brown versus Board of Education that African Americans have, segregated schools are not legal. And here is a state school trying to segregate, opposing desegregation, and trying to prevent an African American from enrolling in classes at Ole Miss University. So he is in that position again where he has to enforce the law. And of course, again, here's this Democrat president superseding the wishes of these Democrats down the South. And you layer that in with this, century, over a century's long, decades at least, long resistance in the South to any orders coming in from the North. This goes back, this predates the Civil War. This this resistance to some central government, this bureaucracy in Washington telling them how to live their lives, telling them how, what they think of this peculiar institution called slavery that ends up in a war. And now they're trying to tell the South how to live their lives as far as, okay, you can take away our slaves, but we can live our lives separately from the African Americans. And here is somebody from the North saying, no, you can't. And they just chafe under that. They hate that. They absolutely hate that. I know. I live in the South. I was born and raised in the North. I've moved to the South. I've lived in the South for the last 30 years of my life. I can tell you from both perspectives because I've lived in both places. Uh, and the North has this idea that they are always the moral, they always have occupy the moral high ground, and they're having to bring their brethren from the South along, kicking and screaming into the modern age. And then you have the Southern perspective, which is who are these holier than thou hypocrites in the North telling us how to live our lives down here in the South. And I don't think those viewpoints will ever merge completely, even though we're all part of the same country. So, and he's part of the same party. It was the Democrat Solid South in the 60s. It was all run by Democrats. Here's a Democrat telling them how to live their lives, interceding, forcing desegregation, protecting the freedom riders. And then in 63, protected the marchers in Birmingham when all these images were splashed across the evening news of Bull Connor and his fire hoses and attack dogs attacking all the Martin Luther King and his marchers. A lot of them were children. I mean, it was just a PR disaster for the South. And by this point, JFK has come around and he's decided this is now one of my issues. You can really see JFK growing a spine, growing up as he serves as president and taking on these hot button political hot potato issues. One is peace, antagonizing the whole national security apparatus, and then the other one is civil rights, antagonizing his own base down in the Democrat Solid South. But he's doing it. So he gives this speech, and he calls civil rights a moral issue, and basically says this is going to be in my second term. This is going to be one of my main, uh, responsibilities or priorities going forward. It's the moral issue of our time. And he proposes what later becomes the 64 Civil Rights Act, which he calls the most sweeping civil rights legislation in the history of our country. And he's calling on Congress to uh, legislate equal rights and equal opportunities through this Civil Rights Act, and for once and for all, settle this issue. And he's going to be the president that brings that to pass. So, boy, you talk about, you go back to June 10th and then June 11th, 2 days. These are very significant days in the life of JFK personally, but also in his administration and in the history of our country. It really antagonized some very powerful people. But we're not quite over the edge yet. I mean, you can just see it getting closer and closer to the edge. We're not quite to the edge yet. On June 12th, the very next day, in response to JFK's civil rights address, Medgar Evers is assassinated by Byron de la Beckwith, who was sent to basically do this by the Mississippi White Citizens Council and Governor Ross Barnett. Now, if you remember, this is Mississippi, and this is in response to two things. A, Kennedy's meddling in the affairs of the state of Mississippi when he sent down the National Guard to ensure that James Meredith could enroll at Ole Miss, which had happened in 62. Ross Barnett had not forgotten it, right? The Mississippi White Citizens Council had not forgotten that. They were extremely upset about that. And so one of the guys who come down to help and became an antagonist to these Mississippi residents, and Governor Ross Barnett was Medgar Evers. He was a very prominent civil rights activist, and they wanted him taken out. And of course, then on June 11th, JFK basically joins hands with the civil rights movements and declares it the moral issue of our time. And so the day after, we get this murder, this very high profile murder of Medgar Evers right in front of his family as he steps out of his vehicle. And so you can see uh, our country is on the precipice on regarding the civil rights issue. In June of 63, we don't know the exact date, but we know it happened in June. This is also the month that JFK finally learns of the S Force. Bobby is the first to learn of it, and he goes right to his brother and tells his brother. He says, I won't get into it in this video. I've done a pretty comprehensive study of the S Force in previous videos, but it was a secret assassination team that had been put together during the 59 campaign by Richard Nixon and a bunch of people in the private sector that were supporters of his. And the intention was to take out Castro before the election so Nixon could get credit for it. Operation Mongoose wasn't happening quick enough. That was on the books. That was what the White House could be associated with. This was off the books. This was a covert operation that could not touch the White House, which is why he went through private individuals. And they had gone and engaged the help of the mafia. That's where, and the Cubans. It's that old saying, crap runs downhill. Nixon, who is the vice president at the time, goes outside the halls of government and employs the help of private citizen Howard Hughes. Howard Hughes gets his attorneys. His attorneys get the mafia, and the mafia get the Cubans. and and eventually, Santos Trafficante puts together this S Force, which is why it's called the S Force, named after Santos. And he essentially recruits back his own men from Operation Mongoose, who had been working for the CIA, which was smart, so that they could never, the CIA couldn't uh, allow them to be exposed because they had been working for the CIA, for the US government for the last few years in Operation Mongoose. But now they're being trained as assassins. And they spread them out to 5 bases, 3 at each base. Periodically, they'd be picked up by Tosh Plumley and taken across the border into Mexico, where they do their training at Clint Merce. And technically, it was called the Triangular Fire Team. And the idea was we can't get close to Castro to assassinate. We're going to have to assassinate him from distance. And we're going to have to use high-powered weapons with scopes, probably on a moving target, and shoot from distance with 3 teams and get in between a triangulated hit, a triangular fire team. And they've been training all this time. Of course, then Nixon did not win the election in 60, so he loses control over this triangular fire team, this covert war against Castro. And they've been training under the, ever since, still trying to, we saw E. Howard Hunt tried to launch this S Force into Cuba to assassinate Castro in January. Well, here it is, June, and they still exist. They're still out there. Part of the reason why the White House found out about this is because what E. Howard Hunt did in January in an attempted assassination of Castro. Eventually, they figure out, oh, this is a different assassination program than executive action, which was the one that the CIA was using to take out foreign heads of state. This is a separate entity altogether. And it was unaccountable to anybody. Kennedy's just now finding out about it. It's existed since the latter stages of 59. Nixon technically had control over it then, but he's no longer in government, so who's in control of it? These rogue CIA people. So he gives the stand down order. And basically he's saying, I want this thing disbanded. We're not in the business of running around assassinating foreign heads of state, especially if I'm not signing off on these things and I have no control over it. It's not sanctioned by me. Well, here again, just like when he gave the stand down order to the bases, and Frank Sturgis and E. Howard Hunt ignored them and did their own thing anyway back in January, here they do it again. This is June of 63. He's given the stand down order. So this is William Pauley, who's been intricately involved in all things related to American intelligence throughout World War II and after. He's one of the reasons why we have a CIA. He participated in a campaign to get uh, Howard, Harry Truman to sign the 1948 Act or law, which created the CIA. He was very much involved in that. His best friend is Allen Dulles. He's one of these guys that's not in the CIA. He's off the books, but he's got all kinds of experience doing covert ops during World War II. He did covert operations over Japan for FDR personally. So this guy's been operating. He's one of these guys that the CIA uses, gives him plausible deniability, but though he's not technically a CIA agent or an asset or an officer. He's doing the bidding of the CIA. He's doing the bidding of the government. He's just a private citizen who has all these uh, contacts and expertise in the field of covert ops. And so he is utilized in this situation by the S Force because he has a yacht and he transports the S Force in his yacht offshore to Havana, and they're going to get picked up by these little rubber dinghies taken ashore, and they're going to go and try to assassinate Castro in the face of what JFK has just done, which is to disband or order a stand down of the S Force. They're going to again pretend like they didn't get the order, didn't know about it. They're just doing what they do, and they claim as their part of their mission was to extract two Soviet officers who allegedly wanted to defect and tell the Americans that Khrushchev was not dismantling the missile bases in Cuba like he said he was. That was their cover. Their real mission in this whole thing was to assassinate Castro. The reason we know about this is because they brought a Time Life reporter on board this Flying Tiger yacht, and he later reported on everything that happened and was said and who was there, et cetera, et cetera. The thinking on their part, well, you said, well, why would they have a reporter on board? Well, Time Life magazine was one of the mouthpieces of the CIA in those days. If you know anything about Operation Mockingbird, it's how the CIA in the 40s and 50s infiltrated the U.S. media with their people or co-opted the media so that they could get out their version of events and 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 that's what we call Operation Mockingbird. It's where they infiltrated the media. It's one of the favorite tricks of intelligence is to infiltrate their enemy with their people. And it serves two purposes. They can rat fuck them from within, which means destroy them from within, or they can just spy on them from within and report back to their bosses. In this case, they infiltrate with their people, so they're actually carrying out a mission, which is to be the mouthpieces of the CIA and pretending like they're the actual news media. And the American people are the dupes. They don't know any better. And so we're taking whatever they say is gospel, and we're just getting basically spoon-fed whatever the CIA wants to tell us. And by the way, this is the only operation, covert operation, that came about during this period of time that has not, according to any document we've ever seen, there's never been an expiration date on it. All these other operations, at some point in time, they had a start date and had a finish date. But Operation Mockingbird, to our knowledge, it continues to this day. All you got to do is turn on the news, and every time there's some kind of event that involves our national security, watch CNN trot out all these these former intelligence officers. Some of them work for them full time, and they're on retainer, and I mean, it's not just CNN. They all do it. MSNBC, Fox, everybody does it. So this is a very big part of the mission of the CIA is public information. You know, it's really disinformation or misinformation purposefully from their people, misleading. You think about how the wars get started this way. And back during after 9/11, it was this sort of Operation Mockingbird press, this disinformation campaign from the press that was coming. That was the conduit, but it was coming from the CIA that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. And that was the story for a year until the American people were finally primed enough to want to go to war and start a war. We'd never started a war before, but this is how important disinformation is. It can lead you into a war, and it did. And we went over there, and there were no weapons of mass destruction to be found. Oh well. The point was to get us into the war, and it succeeded. That's Operation Mockingbird, and it's still at work. In the 2020 election, it was, you know, the intelligence officers who all signed a letter, splashed all, of course, all the television channels and in the media that Hunter Biden's laptop wasn't real, it was Russian disinformation, and that helped get Biden elected over Trump. Then we find out later it was complete balderdash. So you see this all the time. Uh, the CIA has their mission, they have their agenda, and they when they need to, they call on their Operation Mockingbird press, the ones that they control, the ones they've infiltrated, and they parrot the party line. And that becomes the official word. And the American people think, oh, well, 51 intelligence agents signed this letter. It must be real. Not realizing that they lie. That's what they do. That's what the CIA does. That's They're spies. I mean, when you really get down to it, and they pretty much are willing to engage in any kind of behavior to achieve whatever goals or ends that they uh, feel justified in achieving. And the American people are the dupes in all this. So here we are, they're on this boat, and they bring on uh, Dick Billings, who works for Life magazine. Life magazine is one of their Operation Mockingbird press outlets. Henry Luce, who owns it, was co-opted early on in Operation Mockingbird. And so they used Time Life over and over and over again. And you can see here in the JFK assassination, it was that cover was used to basically prosecute and convict the lone gunman. After his death, of course, he can't defend himself in the eyes of the American people. That went a long way to convicting Oswald in the eyes of the American people. That cover. And of course, we now know that whole picture was a fabrication. But it doesn't matter. This is what they do. They use these media outlets as their conduits of their disinformation. And so they're putting him, Dick Billings, on this boat so that when this is all over, they can embarrass JFK. He's going to run a big story. He's going to have pictures, and it's going to have these either Castro's assassinated body, and it's going to be a big victory for the CIA. You know, we've all been trying to get rid of this guy Castro, and if Dick Billings can get photos of Castro having been assassinated, and here's his body as proof, and boy, you talk about how many magazines that'll sell, and how what a conquering hero the CIA is going to look like, and what a bumbling idiot Kennedy's going to look like, especially if if they do find these two Russian generals that say that Khrushchev lied to him and he didn't ever deconstruct the missile sites in Cuba like he said he was going to. It's going to make Kennedy look bad either way, and it's going to make the CIA look good because they're the ones who interceded behind Kennedy's back and against his orders and saved the day. So this is a PR campaign. So they have Dick Billings there, and a couple other examples where Time Life played their role. I talked about the Lee Harvey Oswald cover there, as you see there. Below it, you see the Zapruder film, the frames of the Zapruder film, which the American public, if it wasn't for Robert Groden, you know, making a bootleg copy of that, the American people might not have ever known it even existed, much less ever seen it. But Time Life bought it, and they had it locked away in their vault all that time. And then they uh, presented the American people with these still shot images where they spliced all the different, uh, you can see the frames there. And they did it in such a ways to make it look like or reinforce the government story, the narrative that JFK was killed by a lone gunman from behind and above. Um, they're also the ones who got the story first about these alleged Soviet officers who were in Cuba, and they were really going to play that up, and that's why Dick Billings was there. So that's the answer to the question, why was Dick Billings there? So what did Dick Billings tell us about what happened there on that boat. Well, according to Dick Billings, John Martino, who was on the boat, this longtime militant Cuban exile, involved in just about every anti-Castro activity emanating from Miami. So this guy's just in it up to his neck with all these anti-Castro activities, whether it was Operation Mongoose, whether it was the S-Force. It didn't matter. He was involved in all of it. CIA, mob, whoever's sponsoring it today, he's involved. And he's aboard the yacht with Paulie and Billings, and he's waiting for the S-Force to come back. They've offloaded the S-Force. Off they go to go kill Castro. Now they're waiting. They're going to be their ride out of there when it's over. And during this time, he's ranting and raving like a madman on board this boat. And he's upset that JFK has shut down all these Operation Mongoose bases. And he's calling him every name in the book. Of course, he's drinking. And he's just half-cocked is what he is. And Paulie tells Martino, quote, this is according to Dick Billings, don't worry, John, we're going to kill that motherfucker. And of course, the context of the conversation was Martino was ranting and raving about JFK. And here is Paulie, who is not just some ne'er-do-well boat operator. He owns this boat, which is transporting the S-Force. He's best friends with Allen Dulles. He's neck deep in American intelligence. He's sort of the off-the-books operator for Allen Dulles when they need something done that can't be traced back to him. He's Allen Dulles' plausible deniability, but he is neck deep in all this S-Force stuff, which is why he's transporting them to begin with. And he is telling them as sort of an off-the-books operator, which is this whole S-Force is off the books. And Paulie is involved with it. He's transporting an assassination team, which right now, as we speak, is trying to assassinate Castro, but he's also reassuring Martino during this event that we're going to take care of Kennedy too. So, wow, that was in. So again, this is the third case where the CIA, these rogue operators, have just completely defied the president's orders. In January, it was about the bases. And they launched their little attack against the Russian ship and against Castro. And then in June, it was about the S-Force. And here, right on the heels, they launched another assassination attempt. So that was June. We get to August, and remember now, Kennedy hasn't touched that third rail. He hasn't touched the nuclear option yet. But in August, the Joint Chiefs find out, of course, it's because the CIA tells them, that JFK has been secretly back-channeling with Khrushchev ever since the Cuban Missile Crisis, secret negotiations that, and really his goal is a complete nuclear freeze between the two countries. Nuclear disarmament is his ultimate goal. He knows he can't get that yet. You're going to have to get there in steps. And so they are negotiating a testing ban in the interim, on the way to eventually a nuclear disarmament treaty between us and the Soviets. And of course, oh my goodness, heads are exploding at this point because, he's already backed down in all these different cases that we've talked about through 61 and 62. And now in 63, he's closing all these bases for the conventional war that they wanted. He's closing the covert bases. He's shutting down this now. He's trying to negotiate a testing ban, which would hurt us more than the Soviets because we're ahead of the Soviets. So testing is about the future. Testing is about development. If we shut down development, we negate our advantage, which we're always several years ahead of the Soviets. We stop testing. We're trusting that the Soviets will stop testing and we just freeze everything where they were. And instead of continuing that advantage, we forfeit our advantage. And of course, they all know what he privately wants, which is complete nuclear disarmament, which in their view is treason. And this is the Rubicon. This is the Rubicon. When the Joint Chiefs find out, I'm speculating here, but I can envision a scenario where up until this time, the CIA, very supportive of an assassination attempt against JFK. CIA can't get the Joint Chiefs to go along. That's a big step, right? That's their commander in chief. But when he starts messing with the nuclear weapons, I could see a scenario where the Joint Chiefs finally say, okay, enough's enough. Enough is enough. And you start to see one by one, these conspirators reaching their point of no return, the Rubicon. They say, okay, he's gone too far. So, he reached that point a long time ago with the CIA. He reached that point a long time ago with organized crime, right? Uh, but he's quickly reached, and now he's reached that point with the Joint Chiefs, the military. And now he's going to reach that point with the Cubans, right? Because the Cubans have always been operating on the assumption in America that JFK is their friend. He's made promises to them. I'll move my head here so you can see Castro. Uh, but in September of 60, I mean, even after he failed, Bay of Pigs was a failure, but he said, hey, he goes down to the Orange Bowl and he promises all these Cubans down there, hey, we're going to continue. We're going to one day fly this flag of the Cuban Brigade over a free Havana. Everybody cheers, yay. But they don't realize that privately, he's back channeling with Castro. By the time we get to September of 63, um, this back channel becomes public knowledge. He is doing the same thing with Castro that he's been doing with Khrushchev. Now remember this is all within the context of his speech at American University, which is peace. And he's trying to keep his hardliners at bay, but privately, he's decided in my second term, I'm going to achieve peace with these enemies. The Cold War is going to come to an end. We're going to back channel a settlement between us and the Soviets. This enmity between us and the Cubans is going to come to an end. I'm going to back channel a secret peace between me and Castro. And we're going to end all this. And by the end of my second term, we're going to have peace. Oh, and by the way, we're also going to have civil rights for African Americans because of the civil rights law I'm proposing. These are hot button issues. His goal in this back channel, obviously, is to normalize relations with Cuba and officially recognize Castro's government, which means we're no longer going to be trying to assassinate Castro. The CIA, by this time, we find out later, has tried over 600 times to assassinate Castro. And he's going to end all that. We're going to legitimize him and his government. Now, the CIA gets wind of this through some of his emissaries. He's using off the books emissaries. A former girlfriend of his, Lisa Howard, who he knows has a relationship with Castro and can get close to him, and also a former diplomat named William Atwood. And the CIA wiretaps their phones. And this is how the CIA finds out about what's going on between Kennedy and Castro. And of course, a lot of the folks that are working on behalf of the CIA to overthrow Castro in Operation Mongoose and all the bases and the S-Force, et cetera, are these Cubans. So it's not that hard for the CIA to leak this information to their assets in the Cuban community, and then that word just spreads like wildfire. And now it's like the ultimate betrayal if you're one of these Cuban exiles. They already hate Kennedy because he stranded their men on the beach at Bay of Pigs. They already hate him because he backed down, in their view, the Cuban Missile Crisis. But he is the president. He keeps publicly telling him he's trying to get rid of Castro, trying to overthrow his government. So he's sort of stringing them along while he's made counter promises to Khrushchev. But now they know the truth. Now they know that secretly, behind their backs, he's negotiating with Castro. So that's now we get to October of 63. We're about a month before the assassination now. And he issues National Security Action Memo 263, which is an executive order pulling the first 1,000 U.S. troops. They weren't troops, they're called advisors, but they're pulling them out of Vietnam with plans for a complete withdrawal by the end of 65. He realizes, I can't pull them all out right now. I got an election to win. But after the election, I'm going to pull them all out. There's not going to be a Vietnam War. So if you're the Joint Chiefs now and the CIA, uh, it's over. He's crossed the line. He's absolutely crossed the line because here again, this is the proxy war. If we can't have the war we want with the Soviet Union, if we can't have the war we want with Cuba, the proxy war with the Soviets, then we're certainly we've been meddling in the affairs of Vietnam for a long time by this point, angling towards the war that both the CIA and the military want, the Joint Chiefs want. And now he's saying there's not going to be that war. So just count up all of these betrayals. which is how they view it. In the eyes of the conspirators, it's just one after another, after another, after another. If you're his, I mean, even including his own party, the Democratic Party, the Southern Democrats, he's betrayed them on civil rights, right? Which I believe is why it's not coincidental at all that he was eventually assassinated in a Southern city. But anyway, laying that aside, so that the Southern Democrat, his own party's upset with it. The military, he's closing their bases. He said no to a war uh, in Cuba twice, both at Bay of Pigs and Cuban Missile Crisis. Now he's negotiating with Khrushchev for a test ban on nuclear weapons, and towards his ultimate goal, which is a nuclear disarmament treaty between us and the Soviets. And now he's saying no to Vietnam. If you're the CIA, declared war on it. I mean, from the time of Bay of Pigs on, they've been at war with each other. Now the Cubans feel betrayed. The mafia has been mad at him since he double-crossed him twice over the election of 60. And if you follow my episodes, you know that there's two more conspirators in this. There's LBJ and there's the Secret Service. And if you're LBJ, and this is an entirely separate issue, you realize that your time as vice president is coming to an end because he's going to dump you from the ticket, which means you're not going to be president ever. And furthermore, the Department of Justice is going to go after you for all the Bobby Baker scandals and the all the scandals that came from the state of Texas and going forward to his time in Washington. I mean, scandal after scandal after scandal, right? So A, you're not going to be president. B, you're probably going to end up in jail. And a lot of these people that are mad at JFK, you actually have a good relationship with. And people are starting to put the pieces together and realize our situation would sit much softer if LBJ was president rather than JFK. And of course, LBJ is making the same calculation. My situation personally will sit much softer if JFK's out of the way, especially Bobby. And then you got the Secret Service. Nobody can get close enough to the president if the Secret Service does its job. The Secret Service didn't come into existence until after, Garfield, McKinley had been and Lincoln had been assassinated. And since that time, there's been no successful assassination of a U.S. president until we get to Kennedy, and none since. And just go watch my videos on the Secret Service and the role that they played in this. It was very necessary for them to be complicit in this, to allow it to happen. They don't have to shoot the president. They just got to strip away all his security and make him vulnerable, which is exactly what they did. So all of these, you just see these gears turning as Kennedy makes one decision after another. Starting in 61, kind of tenuously, he kind of tiptoes out. And in 62, he gets more bold. And in 63, boom, it's full frontal, baby. He's just coming out saying, no war with Vietnam. We're going to achieve peace in my second term. And he gives a big speech about it. Then he gives a big speech about civil rights. And it's just one thing after another. And so on November 2, 20 days before Dallas, we have an assassination, which we find out later was signed off on by Kennedy. He regretted it later. It was supposed to just be an overthrow of the government, a coup. And it turned into an assassination of both Diem brothers. Now, these are the guys that we put in power because we thought these will be our puppets over there. And when we get through with Vietnam, we'll control it through our puppets there, the Diem brothers. Well, over time, there's some pretty interesting work done on the Diem brothers by the Unspeakable, that book, The Unspeakable, the JFK assassination. Richard Douglas. His name is Douglas. I can't remember his last name or his full name, but talking about how the Diem brothers have changed their minds about American involvement in Vietnam and how it's complicating their life because the Vietnamese people have figured out that the Americans are not there for their benefit. They're there because Vietnam is just a proxy between them and the Soviets. They're just pawns in this whole game. And Diem by nature of his relationship with the American government, is losing popularity by the day. And the only way he can save face is if he stands up to the man, and the man is the American government. And so, towards the end of Godin Diem's life, he actually starts making it known through the American ambassador there in Vietnam that he wants the Americans to leave. He wants the Americans out of Vietnam. We'll handle our own situation. You're making things worse. And so the CIA realizes, oh, our partner is no longer our partner. He doesn't want to be our partner anymore. He's jeopardizing our plan, which is for a war there. And so we've got a problem here and abroad. We've got a problem with our American president who has just signed an executive order pulling troops out of Vietnam, essentially agreeing with Diem, okay, we'll pull out. And we got a problem over there with Diem. So on November 2, as a result and of course, they go to Kennedy and they say, we're going to overthrow Diem because he has become it's become untenable. You got Buddhist monks immolating themselves in Saigon and the city streets, burning themselves alive in protest of the Diem government. If we're ever going to have any success in Vietnam, we got to get rid of the Diem government and put somebody in charge that the people will support. And Kennedy, this is a mistake, and he admits it later. He realizes after the assassination of Diem, he got snookered again by the CIA. His signature allowing this covert op to go forward was to overthrow the Diem brothers and replace them with somebody whom the people would support. But pretty quickly, the coup turns into an assassination. Both Diem brothers end up dead. And this was on November 2, 1963. Now that's what he knew. What he didn't know was that on that same day, the CIA had planned to take him out as well. The same day. Imagine. He was going to Chicago. He's going to do a motorcade. There was a big Army, I think it was Army Navy game at there at Soldiers Stadium there in Soldiers Field there in Chicago. He's either Army Navy or Air Force Navy. It's two military academies playing each other. He was going to be there as a dignitary and do a motorcade. And an FBI informant named Lee, whom we suspect was Lee Harvey Oswald because he was an FBI informant, called the field office, the FBI field office in Chicago, tipping it off that there was an assassination plot that involved Cuban snipers that were going to shoot him from distance and from a high-rise building. And at the same time, they probably would have tried to cover this up, the FBI. But at the same time, a cleaning lady in Chicago who was cleaning in a rooming house there found high-powered rifles and ammo spread all over the beds in the bedrooms of this cleaning house that they were running out by these four Cubans. And she called the authorities. And so all of a sudden, it's leaking about this assassination plot. And this cleaning lady, this is one of those leaks you can't control. This happened to happen at the exact same time this FBI informant informed the FBI field office. So, and we find this all out later from a Secret Service agent who was from Chicago. His name is Abraham Bolden. He was in Chicago at the time, and he said two of the Cubans, they staked out the rooming house, and they caught two of the Cubans. Two of them got away, but they caught two of them, and they were, according to him, he was in the room during the interrogation. He said that the two that were caught were David Morales and James Braden, that's an alias. He's sometimes known as Jim Braden, Eugene Brading, Eugene Hale Brading. He's got all kinds of names. But Braden is the spotter for David Morales, who is a self-acknowledged, he admitted it, CIA assassin, longtime CIA assassin. And Braden was a spotter. These are the two that were arrested. And because this whole thing didn't go down, it's kind of an interesting story. We got a picture here of Thomas Arthur Valley. This is the guy that was set up in Chicago to be the patsy. He is essentially, if the assassination had happened in Chicago the way it was supposed to, we would read in the history books about this guy, not Lee Harvey Oswald. They always have a patsy set up in advance. Lee Harvey Oswald was the Dallas patsy. This guy, Thomas Arthur Valley, was the Chicago patsy. And I go into it in a lot of detail in another video when I talk about the Secret Service. But just suffice it to say that because the assassination didn't happen, because the White House canceled the trip, is what happened. They got wind of it. They canceled the trip. So now the assassination can't happen as planned. They quietly released David Morales and James Braden into the wind. The only reason we know their names is because Abraham Bolton, a Secret Service whistleblower, told us their names. But we never got that information from the Secret Service or from the FBI or from the Chicago police. They just released them quietly. And they arrested this guy, Thomas Arthur Valley, on some trumped up charge about having a weapon or whatever, and and then quietly released him with a small fine. And he just disappeared into thin air. We didn't find him again until like the 80s, hiding in they hid him away in witness protection program, which is interesting because what did he witness? Whom did he testify against, or whom did he need protection from? For all these years, nobody even knows about it. And the charge that he was eventually charged with was basically just a misdemeanor. I think he got a $5 fine. But if the assassination had happened as planned, these snipers, these uh, snipers and spotters, and they would have carried it out. It had been a long-range hit from high-rise office building using high-power rifles from distance with scopes, just like Dallas. And the guy that would have been set up because he had a job, stop me if you've heard this again, in a office building right along the motorcade route. And so they'd set this guy up to be the patsy. And anyway, that's another story for another time. But what the real import of this is that on November 2, 1963, the CIA planned to take out both of their problems simultaneously. They wanted this war in Vietnam. It was a CIA war all the way. Most of the assets over there were CIA. And now he's saying there's not going to be a war in Vietnam. And the DM brothers are saying the Americans are making problems for us. We want the Americans to go home. So essentially, DM and JFK are in agreement. So they have two problems. So on November 2, they take out one of their problems in Vietnam and simultaneously plan to take out the other problem in Chicago. It just got complicated by this FBI informant named Lee, and also this cleaning lady who reports the presence of all these four Cubans staying at her rooming house with all the weapons, ammo, et cetera, et cetera. So the White House eventually cancels the trip. The American people are none the wiser. But 20 days later, uh, that trip doesn't get canceled. So that's November 2. On November 5th, this is this is when the Cubans find out about the uh, negotiations, the secret negotiations between JFK and Castro through William Atwood and Lisa Howard, et cetera, et cetera. And as I said earlier, they had wiretapped Howard's apartment as she talked back and forth with Atwood. Atwood would talk back and forth with the Kennedy White House. So they knew everything was going on. So November 5th is the day that the Cubans here in America find out what Kennedy is up to. From that point forward, Kennedy is being stalked. He goes down to uh, Palm Beach. This is after his Miami trip. There was rumors of an assassination attempt against him in Miami. There was a FBI informant down there who had predicted it, and Joseph Miltier. And so Santos Trafficante calls off the hit because too many of the authorities, there's too much word leaking out. But they're stalking him from Miami. Then he goes to Palm Beach. By the way, in Miami, part of the reason why the assassination got canceled was because the White House modified the trip and the motorcade went away. Instead of him motorcading through Miami, he helicopters in, gives a speech, then helicopters back out. So you see, what happens is when word leaks out and the White House finds out what's going on, they keep canceling things. They canceled the trip to Chicago, which screwed up the plan to kill him in Chicago. They canceled the motorcade in Miami, which screws up the assassination plot in Miami. He goes to Palm Beach or the Kennedy family compound to basically spend the weekend. relax and vacation a little bit. And Cuban exiles had rented out the house next door, and the entire weekend they blasted loud Cuban music at Kennedy and his family all weekend. So much so that the Kennedy family left early. They were so exasperated. They couldn't get any peace. And it was just a reminder, you're not, we know where you are, and we're stalking you, and we're going to follow you everywhere you go, which is exactly what happened. That was on November 16th. And of course, we all know uh, and then what happened 6 days later. But before that, on November 18th, he goes to Tampa Bay. And this is the occasion where Santos Trafficante called off the hit because the police had been tipped. There was well, that's another story, but there was a letter to the police commissioner in Tampa about an assassination plot, a bomb that was going to go off, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, this is what makes what the Secret Service and how they handled Dallas so ridiculous, so patently obvious they were involved. Because if you're the Secret Service, you know about November 2 now. You know there was an assassination plot, and people were actually arrested and detained. And it's interesting. I forgot to mention this when we were on that slide, but David Morales and James Braden were, according to Abraham Bolden, were two of the men arrested in Chicago, the Cubans that were supposed to carry out this plot. Of course, Braden was the spotter, Morales was the shooter. Where's the next time we see both of these men? That was November 2. 20 days later, James Braden is actually arrested in Dallas in the Daltex building, claiming he was there to make a phone call. But he was arrested and detained briefly and later released because they didn't have anything to hold him. The Daltex building is right at the corner of Elm and Houston. Now, if Braden was there, you know his shooter was there. He's the spotter. You know David Morales was there. And we find out later, in David Morales' own word, he was in Dallas. He was part of the team that, quote, took care of JFK that day. So we know they were in Chicago when the plot to kill him on November 2. And then we know they were there. And of course, other people didn't see David Morales in the Daltex building, but they saw him in Dallas on that weekend. So we know they were in Dallas. Now, his job, he's a CIA assassin, and Braden was a spotter. They were in Chicago when the plot was to kill him there. And the next time we see him, they're both in Dallas. So the Secret Service, they know about the November 2. They know about Miami. They help change everything. So he helicopters in, helicopters out. They know about Tampa Bay because it was a public, Santos calls off the hit, but the Secret Service knows about it because the the letter, the bomb threat that was written to the police commissioner. They know what's going on in Palm Beach, at his estate there with the Cubans blasting the music. They know that their guy, their protectee, is in mortal danger. Everywhere he goes, he's followed by these enemies, and there's all these assassination plots against him. And yet we get to Dallas, and it's just one Secret Service mistake after another, lack of, and they try to pawn it off like it was just a one-time mistake, et cetera, et cetera. No, this was systematic. This was prepared in advance. This was their role in the plot to strip away security to such a degree that the president was a sitting duck by the time he got to Dealey Plaza, which is what he was. So I put here on the Dallas plot, there were three dispensations of the plot, so to speak. The original, they said, well, if we can't get him at Love Field, which they couldn't, there was too many people, too many spectators. We'll get him at Dealey Plaza, which is the preferred location. It's outside. It's a triangulated hit. Lots of great play. We've changed the motorcade route. We couldn't get next to the target, but we brought the target next to the shooter. So, boom, we bring him right into this kill zone. If we can't get him at Dealey Plaza, and no shots were attempted in Dealey Plaza for whatever reason, we'll get him at the Trade Mart. And I went into a lot of detail in my discussion about the Trade Mart, why that was the ideal location rather than the Women's Building, the Women's Museum in Dallas, with all the catwalks and the entrances and exits. It was a security nightmare. And if we don't get him there, the next day he's going to go to LBJ's ranch. We'll get him there. He's not leaving Texas alive. And so he ends up assassinated in Dallas. And we know that story. By the way, on the same day, this is just like November 2 all over again. The CIA, this is how they work, right? They had two problems with respect to Vietnam. They're going to take them both out on November 2. DM in Vietnam and Kennedy in Chicago. And it didn't work, but they get Kennedy 20 days later. Well, on the 20th, they're going to get Kennedy in Dallas. And another problem, continuing problem, is Castro. On the very same day that they're taking out Kennedy in Dallas, they arrange for a poison pen to be delivered to Castro from one of their assets. This is a Cuban, somebody who's a disaffected Cuban military officer on the same day, and they're going to kill Castro on the same day they take out Kennedy, which of course this this secret negotiation between Kennedy and Castro is just as bad as any cooperation between Kennedy and DM. We got to take them all out so that we can keep our control of the of what wars we're going to fight in this Cold War between us and Soviets, and et cetera, et cetera. And so it's just this buildup, and we get to the end, and of course they fail in their attempt to kill Castro, but they succeed in their attempt to kill both DM and JFK. You say, well, what's this got to do with E. Howard Hunt? Well, I'm building to that. I could continue and we wrap in E. Howard Hunt again into all of this, but it would be a longer video. I've already gone on for an hour and some odd minutes. So this is part four. If you come back and watch part five and eventually part six, you'll see where it's all going and how E. Howard Hunt is involved in all of this. So anyway, that's it for today. Thanks for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you on episode 5. Thank you. Blessings.